So I read recently that Los Angeles' famed Staples Center was being renamed the Crypto.com Arena. And well, I don't know, it got me to thinking, you know? Getting older. Sometimes I look around and, well, I don't even recognize the world I'm living in. Things are changing every day, and not always for the better. And it's time to take a moment to talk about how things were just, well, a bit more simple. Back in my day. Back in my day, the Staples Center wasn't changing its name all willy-nilly. No, back in my day, we had loyalty, by golly. And that loyalty wasn't to some faceless, decentralized digital currency company. It was to some faceless corporate office supply depot. Because nothing says Laker basketball like a 50,000 square foot megastore full of ergonomic office chairs. Back in my day, Big Bird wasn't getting vaccinated for COVID. Snuffleupagus. No, sir. Back in my day, if you saw a needle on Sesame Street, it meant Oscar was using again. Back in my day, there was no bisexual Superman. Back in my day, Superman was just a very fit journalist who wore glasses and was very secretive. Spent a lot of time in a phone booth, and holy crap, maybe he was bisexual this whole time. Oh, my goodness. My goodness. Now, Rusty, which superhero do you think is secretly bisexual? Green Arrow, why? Well, it is a well-manicured beard. No, I don't want to show a picture, Rusty. This is an observation for people who already know what Green Arrow looks like. Maybe you're the nerd. Back in my day, President Biden's approval rating wasn't at 38%. Back in my day, President Trump's approval rating was at 38%, and we couldn't believe it was that high. Until we went back to our hometowns for Thanksgiving, and we were like, oh, right. Back in my day, people weren't attending virtual meetings on Meta Zuckernuts. We spent our time on Facebook tending to our virtual crops and poking our ex-girlfriends until they blocked us. Then we'd grow bitter and delusional and start watching alt-right videos, one after the other, until we had some pretty screwed up ideas about how to make America great again. Back in my day, there wasn't a Pam and Tommy series coming out on Hulu, paradiddles. Back in my day, if you wanted to watch Pam and Tommy, you had to be friends with the kid whose parents had one of those VCRs that could make copies, and he'd hook you up with a tape that had been copied a zillion times and was so grainy you couldn't tell a boob from an elbow. But it got the job done. Back in my day, Mel Gibson wasn't making a Lethal Weapon 5. Back then, Mel Gibson wasn't making anything because no one wanted their name associated with his brand of sexism and anti-Semitism. But now that sexism and anti-Semitism are over forever, we can forgive him and move on. They're not over? Well, give me one example. All right, fine. Give me 10 examples. Well, who knows? Maybe Lethal Weapon 5 will fix it all. Back in my day, Apple wasn't developing a self-driving car, Macintosh. Back in my day, Apple was developing a phone with a self-destructing screen. All you had to do was drop it from a height higher than 1 inch. Back in my day, Matthew McConaughey wasn't thinking about running for governor of Texas. Back in my day, Matthew McConaughey was thinking about, well, honestly, who the knows what that guy's thinking about? I mean, heck, maybe he was thinking about running for governor. Maybe he was thinking about bongo drums or shrimp tacos or huarache sandals, or what he'd say to the Dalai Lama or what he wouldn't say to Dennis Leary. The fact is, none of us know what's inside that man's head, but we'd like to because, man, it seems like he's got it all figured out. Back in my day, Taylor Swift wasn't re-recording all her albums. I was. People were not excited. Taylor even sent me a cease and desist letter, which I framed, free autograph. Back in my day, we didn't have terrifying Korean TV shows like Squid Game, Bibimbap. Back in my day, the only Squid Game we had was ordering calamari at a 24-hour diner and trying to guess how much was real squid and how much was pig buttholes. And in that Squid Game, there were no winners. You like pig buttholes, Rusty? Back in my day, New York wasn't ending their gifted and talented school programs D+. Back in my days, those programs were the only way New York kids got into the Ivy Leagues. Either that or you would pay some rowing coach up at Dartmouth to say your kid was the best coxswain this side of the Hudson, even though you both knew he couldn't tell the difference between a kayak and a canoe. And then your son would find out and say, I don't want to get into school on a lie. And you'd say, well, you're certainly not getting in on the truth because Harvard ain't going to be blown away by the fact that you make sick beats in your computer all day long. And he'd say, you never believed in my music. And you'd say, oh, if you can call that music. And then your wife would come in and say, don't be so hard on him. And you'd say, maybe if we were hard on him, he wouldn't have turned out this way. And she'd say, just fix it. And you'd yell, I'm trying to fix it, but Tyler won't even pretend to be good at rowing. And then he'd yell, I'm not Tyler anymore, I'm Ty Fresh. And you'd look at your wife with the expectation that you would finally come over to your side of the argument, but she wouldn't. So you throw your hands up in the air and you go down to your man cave to watch the History Channel. Oh, but I love that boy. I love him. I had to do that because y'all seemed a little bummed out. How I was mean to my fictional son. Wait till they find out you're not a real dog. Back in my day, sure, coronavirus cases were spiking over the holidays, but this year, because of vaccines, we can gather with family members and friends who have been inoculated. And won't that be nice, Rusty? What's that, Rusty? You're not anti-vax per se, but you have some questions? Rusty, are you vaccinated or are you not vaccinated? You're immunized? What the hell does that mean? That medicine is for horses, not dogs. No, horses are not just tall dogs. You know what, Rusty? I think you got a little bit too much screen time in this segment. Well, I'm sorry, but sometimes you just have to do that. This grumpy old Gus sometimes gets his grape on. This has been Back in My Day.